Well, shall we start?
Yes, we shall start. I'll start by saying welcome to all of our listeners, whatever listeners we have thus far. This is our first podcast episode, or first episode that we are shooting for podcast purposes for our new podcast titled Book Nerds with Hannah and Dewitt. I'm Dewitt Scott. I'm Student Success Specialist at Moraine Valley Community College.
And I'm Hannah Carlton. I'm a librarian here at Moraine Valley Community College Library. And I guess I just want to jump in and say we've been recording videos talking about books for I don't know, it's been 6 months, right? Yeah. Since January, for a separate thing that the college was doing called Moraine Reads, where we share thoughts about books that we love and impact us. And Dewitt and I just took this and ran with
it. Yes, we have. In the way that two book nerds could run with book descriptions, book reviews. So hence the term for our new get together here as Book Nerds with Hannah and Dewitt.
I just have to shout out and say I blame Troy Swanson for the title. He named us, but I embrace it and Troy, I own it.
You did this, Troy. You labeled us Book Nerds, but that's okay because we like it.
Woo!
So Hannah will introduce our book review topic for today. So I'll let you break that down for us, Hannah.
Okay, great. Well, today we have chosen to talk about books that sort of loosely fit under the memoir autobiography category. And I think we both, I don't know, what are some things that draw you to memoirs or autobiographies, Dewitt?
So personally, I like to hear other people's stories and to not only for the uniqueness of their stories, but to find out how they relate to me, right? With the understanding that when you're going through things or you experience things, you tend to think you're the only person that experienced those things in those ways until you read autobiographies or biographies or memoirs or whatever, and you realize that 99.9% of what you're dealing with is not new. They have people who have come before you have dealt with it, and now you can learn from their experiences on what you can do moving forward.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's something I look for, not just in memoirs, but in most interactions with books. It's what of yourself can you see in what you find on the page? But it's particularly meaningful with memoirs, because it's it's a way to connect with another person's actual experience and the way that they perceived it and the way they want to communicate it to you, which is all, yeah.
It's super cool. It's the coolest thing about reading memoirs.
Yeah. Okay, well, shall I start with my first pick?
Yes.
Okay. Well, to start off our memoir autobiography discussion, I decided to choose a book that kind of defies those genre categories. So right off the bat, I picked one that's a little bit outside the box. But I decided to talk about a book called Bluets by Maggie Nelson. So you might have heard of Maggie Nelson. She's pretty well known. She's been winning awards and stuff lately. She wrote a book called The Argonauts a couple of years ago that was really well received. But Maggie Nelson is known for, I think I read a description of her somewhere that called her genre busting, which I think is a really cool way to be described. And I think more authors should shoot for this. But this is a weird book, and it is genre busting. It's almost written like poetry. The form of the book is really unusual. It's written as, it's 240 or so numbered paragraphs. So every paragraph has a number in front of it, and then there's a paragraph. Some paragraphs are long. Some of them are a page and a half or 2 pages. Some of them are short. They're just a sentence. And this is how she organizes this book. And on the surface, this book is about her obsession with the color blue, which seems a little bit strange on the surface, but it's really, I think deep down, it's a lens that she's using to view and talk about a couple of things, a couple of issues, a couple of struggles that she went through. So one, a really bad breakup. Two, a friend of hers was in a horrible, debilitating accident. And so it's this the color blue and kind of this obsession around it, what is a way that it almost feels like a literary conceit that she's using to deal with issues of loss and of unfulfilled desire and a way to work through these struggles in her life. And it's this blend of her life, and she brings in all these writers and poets. She talks about Cezanne and Wittgenstein and Goethe and Emerson and Byron and William Carlos Williams. And it's like, she like every time color is mentioned in like the literary canon, she brings it in, or anytime blue is mentioned. But it's all like grounded in her, she's really struggling at the end of this relationship that ended kind of, that she talks about in this. And it's really grounded in her experience and kind of how she learns to let go in a way. So blue, the obsession with blue is more than just the color blue. It really stands for a whole range of, like, I think there's emotional symbolism, and I would have to like really sit down with a with like a I have like a thesaurus of literary terms, and I would have to sit down with it to decide exactly what to call this, but I think genre bending and awesome is a good way to put it.
Awesome is always a good way. It is a nice label.
Yeah.
So how did you get introduced to the book?
When I was doing my undergrad, one of my, like a TA for my class, one of my classes was getting a master's degree in creative nonfiction, which is a thing. You can get master's in creative nonfiction, which is so cool. And that actually probably is the best term for this. It is creative nonfiction. But she turned me on to it. And it was a cool thing. And I have this whole list of other books that are like written in these little like episodic snippets that are like, if you're curious about exploring more things like this, Roland Barthes wrote a book called A Lover's Discourse, which is just these little like snippet bits that examine the idea of love in literature and culture over the last like couple of centuries from all these different angles. And it's a really cool read. It's weird, but it's cool.
Okay. So
yeah.
Because of the uniqueness of the book, when reading it, how do you work through it? So I guess what I mean is the number of paragraphs all the way through. You said 240 paragraphs. I think about trying to read that and trying to make it all does it all come together, or is there different, like, are the chapters broken into different themes or?
No, no chapters. It's just, I think of it kind of in two ways. So one, it's a little bit of a nonlinear narrative, right? So you kind of start in the middle and you learn backstory, but it also moves forward kind of as you move through the numbered paragraphs. And I guess like, I kind of approach this as like I approach poetry, where it's like, you just kind of have to go with it for a little bit. And it's really like, it sounds, as I'm describing it, it sounds like it's not super organized, but actually this is like, you can tell that this book was really carefully designed and intentionally like put together. It's beautifully structured, even though it's not structured in a way that, any other book that I've ever read is structured. So it's very intentional. And yeah, I think the best analogy is that it's a nonlinear narrative in the form of a memoir, which again, very unusual for a memoir to not really be put together in a linear manner. So
yeah. I mean, it sounds cool because it's great to see the creativity. I didn't know creative nonfiction was a thing. Right. When you think of creative writing, you instantly think of fiction. But to see a nonfiction work put together so creatively, numbered paragraphs, no chapters, and still is a quality book. That says a lot about her as a writer, and it makes you think of nonfiction writers as artists. We don't necessarily think about them as artists.
Yes.
But she sounds very much like this is art.
Yes. Yes. I agree with that. Absolutely. And I think another one of Maggie Nelson's books from, I think it was written in the 90s. So it's, a good 20 plus years ago, but it was called Jane, a Murder. And so this book it's true crime. I think it's the story of the murder of Maggie Nelson's aunt that happened in the 80s or years ago, I think, but told through poetry. So it's like this mashup of true crime and poetry that
okay.
It's like, it's a really cool book. But you're never going to read anything else like it, or I had never read anything else like it. So
I've never heard anything else like that. And then for it to be such a personal story, right? True crime stories, usually aren't so personal. It's a personal true crime story in a form of poetry.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's art. I don't care what anyone says. That's art. It could be true crime. It could be nonfiction. That is a work of art.
Well, and I feel like, okay, so harkening back to our last conversation about poetry, right? And so we were talking about how poetry isn't always like what we think of, what the kind of the stereotype of it. It doesn't have to be beautiful. It doesn't have to be like pretty. It doesn't have to, be comfortable. It's like, really, really moving poetry is uncomfortable. It's unusual. It should be a little bit unsettling sometimes. And I feel like Maggie Nelson seems to be really good at that. Like she takes that aspect of poetry and she applies it to something that actually happened to her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would love to know how mentally or spiritually, how she gets into that space to be able to do that type of work. Like where does she have to be in order to produce something like that? That's not something that's not easy. You can't just wake up and do that. You have to be in a certain place mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and then to produce it at such a high quality. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, I get that, I feel like you have to be really frustrated with, your ability to express something in a conventional way. It's like there has to be something more that you want to say. Mm-hmm. And it's like the inability to communicate what you want to through like conventional means. That's like, and having to push to really express yourself, express what you want to say. Like that's poetry, the push to like actually communicate.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay. But we're off topic. We're not coming back to poetry again.
We're book nerds. So
there we go.
It's okay.
Okay. Well, so that was my first pick. DeWitt, would you introduce your first pick?
Yes. My first pick actually is a book titled Strong Inside. And the subtitle is Perry Wallace and the Collision of Race and Sports in the South. And it's written by Andrew Maraniss. And this is one of my favorite books because I'm a huge basketball fan. As much as I'm a book nerd, I'm a basketball nerd. And this book, Strong Inside, sort of combines so much of the things that I like. It's a book. It is a biography. It is centered in basketball, but the time period takes place in the 1960s at the height of the Civil Rights Movement. So, the book literally just screams DeWitt, right? It screams DeWitt. And the story is about a man by the name of Perry Wallace, who grew up in Nashville, Tennessee I believe he was born in the 40s, in the late 40s. And he living in Nashville, Tennessee in the 40s, of course, is the South, and segregation, racism, those things were apparent. But as many Black people from that time, as they speak about living in segregation. When living in segregated areas, you don't necessarily face much racism on a day-to-day because your whole world is Black. And he's living in Nashville. He grew up to be a very good basketball player, one of the top high school basketball players in this area, played for a really good high school team. And when it came time for him to be recruited, he was a senior in 1966, I believe. So when it came time for him to be recruited, it was only natural that historically Black college would be somewhere that he would go. All of the top players before him, they all went to historically Black colleges because, again, this is the South, this is the 60s. Although Brown versus Board of Education was passed in 1954, it wasn't immediately instituted. And in many places, for those that are familiar with the situation, in many places it had to be very strongly enforced from the South and all the way up as high as north as places like Boston and things like that. So by the mid 60s, it still wasn't a regular thing for Black students to go to white schools, K-12 or college. But when being recruited, Perry did the unique, unpopular thing, and rather than go to a historically Black college, he signed with Vanderbilt University, right in his hometown of Nashville. And just that move in itself is so dynamic because he was not only the first Black player or Black athlete to go to Vanderbilt, he was the first Black basketball player in the entire Southeastern Conference, which covers what we know as the Southeast or the Confederate South, the states, University of Alabama, University of Georgia, University of Mississippi, Mississippi State, University of Florida, all of those schools at that time. So that was unique in itself, but also him being from Nashville, Vanderbilt is in Nashville, but Nashville is one of the national hubs for historically Black colleges. You have Tennessee State that is there. You have Meharry Medical College that is there. You have, I'm forgetting another, Fisk University is there. So you have all of these. So Nashville is a city, but it has so many colleges, right? And Vanderbilt is in the middle of that. And he, out of all of those historically Black colleges in the area, he chose Vanderbilt. But I'll try to keep it succinct because I could talk about it for so long. As the first Black basketball player in the Southeastern Conference, it was great to break the barrier on campus, but playing in those other conference schools was a very challenging situation. University of Kentucky, which was historically racist. If anyone has seen the movie Glory Road, that was about the coach at the University of Kentucky, which was the top program at the time, Adolph Rupp. He wouldn't allow Black players on his team. And then when he did, he wouldn't allow them to start. And he felt he would never lose to a team of Black players, but Glory Road, and is on and on. This is the conference Perry is in. So when he goes on the road to play these games, he's facing all sorts of racial epithets and just the hate that is happening throughout the game when he's on the bench, when he's playing, on the way to the locker room, on the way out the locker room. Very, very contentious situation to the point that the University of Mississippi canceled the game that was scheduled. They were scheduled to play against Perry in his school because he was Black. They didn't believe in even having a Black player on the court to play against, let alone in their actual school. But the whole experience changed Perry in a very positive way. For one, he was a trailblazer because more Black players came after him into Vanderbilt and to the Southeastern Conference. Secondly, because of his experiences, he became an activist on campus, leading Black student organizations, protests in the president's and the chancellor's office, and doing work to get some of the more polarizing civil rights figures at the time on campus. So Stokely Carmichael came to campus, Fannie Lou Hamer came to campus, a lot of other people came to campus, and he was able to see them and connect with them up close. But it's a really engaging story. And Perry actually died, I want to say a couple of years ago, not too long ago. But it was great to see his work. It was great to see his life put together in this way because it's a very unknown story. It's not a popular story, so it's a book that had a strong effect on me. Like I said, it's so much intersected in my interests. I love the civil rights movement. I love history, but I love basketball. I love reading, and all of these things came together. And when I picked up the book, I fell in love with it. I couldn't put it down. So
I'm really struck by, it sounds like he he very deliberately chose a more, to forge a more difficult path. It's so, did he like talk at all about like what, why did he choose Vanderbilt? Like why did he decide that that was what he wanted to do? Because
yeah, so, and you're right, he purposely chose, let's say, the path less traveled. And in the book, he sort of mentions and alludes to just he wanted to do what he felt was best for him. He wanted a chance at a great education, and not to say that any other college wouldn't have it, because historically Black colleges for a long time have been great places for education. But he wanted a chance at a great education. He wanted a chance to play basketball at the highest level possible, and in a way to test his skills, in a way to grow as a person. And it really worked out. He became someone, by his senior year on campus, he was voted most popular by the student body, which says a lot. In 1970, with very few Black people on campus, he's voted by a largely white campus as the most popular. So he really just transformed the campus, transformed the entire idea of a Black athlete in this conference doing well. And he was a great student as well, top-notch student. And it's a very trailblazing story that I had no idea who Perry Wallace was. I had no idea anything about this until I stumbled across this book. And when you read it, you get the thought that this should be a movie. You should have study groups. Everybody should know about this story. So.
Yeah, well, it's like, we have like, there's the iconic image of the governor of Mississippi, like literally physically barring students, African-American students, from registering. And like this has been like, I had never heard about this before you mentioned it, but it's another like kind of, it seems like another like huge story in higher education in, the kind of the I don't know, the last gasp of segregation in the South. It's like, this seems like a big story.
Yeah, no, and what you alluded to, so you had the issue, I think, in 1961 of the Bull Connor, I forget if it was Bull Connor or if it was the governor, who blocked the students at the University of Alabama from getting into the door.
Alabama. I'm mixing up my universities.
No, yeah, it's so much. I believe it's Autherine Lucy in 1961. She tried to get into the door at the University of Alabama. She was blocked by the governor. And that was in 61. And then you had James Meredith, who was the first Black student at the University of Mississippi, and in the 60s. And his situation was so polarizing. He was the first Black student at the University of Mississippi, and no students wanted to be in a room with him. So his classes, it would be just him in the room, and with the professor, and that's it. And James Meredith, he was such a courageous guy that he decided after a year or two of being there, he wanted to do what was called a walk for freedom, where he walked through the South as this student who was polarized for enrolling in the University of Mississippi. And I think on day 2 of the march, he was shot, and he survived, but he did the march alone, right? So that's the backdrop of Perry deciding to go to Vanderbilt. Now, one thing that he also alludes to, and the author alludes to, is that yes, he's the first in this Confederate South to do this, but it's also notable that he did it in Tennessee, which was the northernmost state, that area, right? When you're talking Louisiana, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina, those are just, it seems like the further south and east you went, it's just, just
the crazier things get.
Exactly, right? A powder keg, right? When you think about Nashville is 6 hours. It's a 6-hour drive from Chicago, and it's right south of Kentucky, which many people in Kentucky consider themselves Midwestern. So it was definitely a gradual. I think it was a good way to begin.
Yeah,
I don't know if him going directly to University of Florida would have been, the best situation for anyone. So,
well, it's still like, this is, it sounds like, as if you think about it, like he was 18 when he decided to do this, right? It's like, what kind of 18-year-old can decide to do this and see it through? Like, that's absolutely incredible. I'm blown away.
It's tremendous. It's tremendous to be a kid, and I know his family had to be worried the whole way. But yes, it's titled Strong Inside by Andrew Maraniss. I hope I'm not messing up the author's name. Andrew Maraniss. And I recommend it for anyone who can find it. If you can't buy it, go to your local library. Hannah and I are huge library advocates. So, but give us your second pick.
Okay, well, my mixing up the University of Alabama and Mississippi is somewhat understandable because my next pick takes place in Mississippi. Okay. So it was on my mind. So my next pick is called Men We Reaped. It's by Jesmyn Ward. And Jesmyn Ward is, wow, she is a fantastic writer. And she has won a National Book Award for, I think, one of her fiction books. It was either Salvage the Bones or Sing Unburied Sing. I can't remember which one. But I like to describe her fiction as like Southern Gothic for the 21st century. So it's like, it's very, some of it's a little bit creepy or unsettling, but so interesting, and very well written. So I recommend her fiction, but she wrote this memoir called Men We Reaped. And so the idea behind this book, so during about a 2-year period in her life, and it's somewhere around the year 2000, and she's quite young. She's in her 20s, still in college at this point, in college and just out of college. Mm-hmm. But during this 2-year period in her life, five young men, who she knew in different ways. I think 2 of them were like, one of them was an ex-boyfriend of a sister. One of them had a child with one of her sisters. One of them was her cousin. One of them was the little brother of her best friend growing up. And then one of them was her brother. So these 5 young African-American men, she's African-American, but these 5 young African-American men who she grew up with, were part of her circle, they died within a 2-year period. And it was just this string of loss after loss after loss. And they didn't, they all died in different ways, right? So one overdosed, one was in a car accident with a train, which is just like,
extremely tragic.
Yeah, one committed suicide, and her brother was run off the road by a drunk driver. So this is just, it's hard to talk about this. And I warned Dewitt before we started recording this that I might start crying, because this is a hard book. There's a lot of loss. There's a lot of grief. So Jesmyn Ward, she weaves these 5 stories of these 5 young men in with her own story. So she talks about her family growing up, her parents separated, and her experience with that. You get to know her sisters really well, and her brother Josh, but you get to know her family well and kind of track her journey. Not easy. I mean, she grew up, poor in rural Mississippi. So it was, she has accomplished amazing things against pretty overwhelming odds. But she weaves this story in kind of this, it's a way of showing rather than telling some of the systemic issues that affect people in the rural South, African Americans in the rural South, and men specifically. And it's really giving, for me, it was putting faces and names and telling stories of people who could otherwise, it's easy to, fall back on statistics. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to tell stories like this. Mm-hmm. And I think that she has shared something really, really important. And it's heartbreaking. I don't know, but kind of on a brighter side, it's like, you do kind of feel like you get to know these young men a little bit. You get to know her pretty well, I think. She opens up a lot. And I don't know. I picked out a couple of things to read. There was this one, she wrote this description of her cousin that I just thought was like, it shows you how she can describe people and how she writes about them. And it's just so clear. And like, you know them in a few words, or you feel like you know them a little bit. I don't know. Is that okay if I read a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is from the chapter about her cousin, CJ. Okay. For a long time, I did not see CJ. I went away to college when he was 12, and when I came back, there he was. Taller, my height at least, but short for a man. He was shirtless. The little boy body he had was now larger, but he was still wiry, and his muscles were like rocks under his skin. There was no fat on him. He had grown all his hair long and braided it back to his head, so his face stood out in hard relief. He was pale, freckled, and still able to do things with his body I could not imagine possible. I just like, it's hard to describe. I think writing really good descriptions of people that not only tell you what they look like, but give you like a sense of how they present themselves in the world, like how they occupy space is so hard. And like, I picked that because I felt like I could see CJ, and I could like imagine how he held himself and how he like walked in the world. And that's really hard to do. And that's a gift. To a reader.
So reading something like that, which is, it's so tragic and it's so heart-wrenching. And I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of someone who may not read as regularly or as widely as you and I do. Someone may say, well, why would I read that? That is depressing. That doesn't make me feel good. It puts me in a sad place. That's not what I want to feel. What is your response to that as someone who reads all the time?
I think there are two things. So one, there's kind of the expected response that like, you read because you can't be everywhere and meet everyone and, experience everything, even though you might want to. I guess I'm one of those people. It's like, if I could spend my life traveling, I would do that very quickly, but I guess that hasn't been in the cards yet. So like, and that includes, I guess that includes the not so nice stuff too. It's like, it's not just, seeing shiny touristy things. It's meeting people and it's hearing about how other people live and what their experiences have been. And I guess too, I feel like reading something like this is another way to I'm going back to the, what do you see of yourself in the text? And I go back and I think about, when I was in high school, one of my aunt, my father's sister, died of lung cancer. And it was this agonizing slide for her. It was, I saw her, we went to visit about a month before she died. And it was this, I still can't like talk about it because it was just so, like, she wasn't the woman I knew. She was a shell. And she was in so much pain, and it was, but I feel like, reading about, Jesmyn Ward's experience, like I understand my own experience a little bit better, or I understand it in more depth or in a different way. So it's a way to I don't know, it's using empathy to, I don't know, expand your own emotional understanding, expand, your, or help you process your own experiences with grief. I don't know if that made sense.
No, it definitely did. It does. Seeing how someone else experiences um something so difficult, like you say, it helps you. If anything, it's like we said before, you're not alone. If anything, right? And even beyond that, it helps make sense of it helps bring context and make sense of what you're going through.
Yeah. I'm sorry. This book is, it's a hard book. It's a serious book, but it's just, again, it's so beautifully written. Like I couldn't not talk about it. So
it's great. It's great.
Yeah.
I'm glad, because we never know who's listening, and they may need to check out the book, and now that they heard that you read it and heard your explanation, they say, hey, maybe I'll take a look at it. So it's valuable.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's switch gears a little bit. DeWitt, what's your next pick?
So my next pick, and again, for those who are listening, I'm nowhere as well read or as intelligent as Hannah.
Oh, please.
All of my books are so narrow. All of my reading is so narrow. It's just like I think, but wherever we take this friendship of ours, I think when it's said and done, I'm going to be a better reader because I'm going to get out of this mini box that I'm in. Right. So, but as of now, I am in this mini box. All right. And this stage of the box for my next book is a book entitled Soledad Brothers. Soledad Brother. And the subtitle is called The Prison Letters of George Jackson. All right. So if I didn't talk about race and segregation and things like that enough in the last book, now we'll talk about prison and race and segregation and Black people. Right. So George Jackson is he's born in Chicago, but raised in California. He grew up in impoverished neighborhoods, didn't really have great education, but he was arrested, I believe, 1961. I want to say that's the correct year. 1961. He was arrested for armed robbery of a gas station, in which $70 were taken out of the register. He maintains his innocence, but nonetheless, he was convicted. And the sentencing at that time, this is the early 60s, he was sentenced to 1 year to life, which those sentences aren't a norm anymore. Now they give you set times. They don't give you these broad ranges anymore. But 1 year to life, meaning that after every year, he would have to go before the parole board to see if he would be released. So that's what the situation he was in. He became a Black Panther in prison, and he became a very vocal activist in prison, very vocal against the prison administration, against the correctional officers, against everything that the prison sort of stands for. So because of that, he believes, and many of those who were with him believes, he was always targeted by officers, always targeted by the administration for things that went wrong. So in his book, Soledad Brother, it's titled Soledad Brother because he was housed in Soledad Prison, which is in California, one of the more notorious prisons in California. And a crime took place where, I'm trying to summarize it accurately. A crime took place. So Soledad Prison, like many of the prisons in California at that time, were racially segregated, not by law, but by custom. The prison administration felt that it was safer to keep Blacks with Blacks, whites with whites, and the term at the time was Chicanos, or Mexicans with Mexicans. And Soledad was notorious for its racial animosity between the groups. George always believed that the racial animosity between the groups was sort of fueled by the administration, with the understanding of the administration can oppress everyone if they keep the inmates divided. And exactly, this sort of into fighting, they wouldn't realize all of the oppression they were facing from above. So there was an incident where, for the first time in a very long time, blacks and whites were allowed onto the prison yard at the same time. And because of the years of animosity between the two, a fight broke out. For anyone familiar with the prison system, in the yard, there's always a guard that's in the tower who is there to prevent things from getting out of hand. That guard in the tower has a shotgun, has a rifle. The rifle went off and two black men, I believe 2 black men were killed. Now, all of the black inmates believe it was racially motivated because it was an interracial fight, but only black guys were killed and there was no warning shot as is supposed to happen. The cop was not indicted for any crime. When the non-indictment came down, a prison riot broke out and a correctional officer died. Right. And I promise the story it's not so grim, at least not all of it. Right. So the officer died. When the officer died, there was 3 guys who were charged with the death. One of them was George. Right. George says he didn't do it, but because of his history, he's been targeted. And him and the other guys who were charged, they became known as the Soledad Brothers. Because they were in Soledad Prison, they were fighting for their innocence. So what exactly is the book? It is a collection of prison letters that George wrote to friends and family during his time while he was incarcerated. In here are just correspondence. Him reaching out to his parents, his brother. He has multiple letters that he's written to Angela Davis, the activist. And he collected them, he compiled them into a book. The book became a bestseller while he was in prison. I think over 400,000 sold while he was in prison, and he became a celebrity. And the letters are, some of them are hilarious, as he his anger towards his dad and his family. Some of them are heart-wrenching, and just talks about the things that he's dealing with every day. Some of them are very informative. As you read them, you realize he was a very deep reader, and he talks about a lot of things that he's learned. Most of the letters are addressed to his mother. So it's really insightful. Really, it's a good book, and it's become a cult classic for people of that time, right? So, and to wrap up my Soledad Brother section, George had a young brother by the name of Jonathan. Jonathan was 17. Jonathan felt the need to try to break George out of prison. These are all true stories. In the midst of trying to break Jonathan out of prison, he went into a federal courthouse, took a judge hostage. Jonathan ended up dying in the aftermath with the police. He died in August of 1970. George led a prison riot in August of 1971, and he died, right, just a year later. So you have all of these things that are sort of taking place, all of it in the name of anti-oppression. What has become of that is, starting in the 1970s, this idea of what's known as Black August. And Black August started in California prisons. It has expanded worldwide outside of prisons, and using the month of August as a month of atonement and reflection on the Black liberation movement. So those who adhere to Black August use that month to fast, increase working out, increase reading, whatever it may be, as a way to focus on, this is the month that we dedicate to Black liberation fighters, Black freedom fighters who are wrongly accused, who are wrongly incarcerated, or who are just fighting for better life for everyone. I have been a proponent for Black August for years. In the month of August, I abstain from television because I watch a lot of television. I abstain from television. I do not eat candy. I do not drink pop. Chicago, we say pop. The rest of the world says soda. And I increase my reading if that's possible. And that stems from what I've learned about George and the Soledad Brothers. So I'll stop there because I've already said a lot. So.
Well, the fact that this is a book of letters really, like, it jumps out to me. Or it really makes it, there's something, I don't know. So I'm a librarian, I'm a millennial. It's like, I'm not like, I don't know. But I really feel like, not with writing going totally electronic, right? I feel like we've lost something. I feel like, the act of sitting down and writing a letter to someone and having a record like that, right?
Yeah.
It's like you have a record of all of the letters that he wrote. And I mean, theoretically somewhere, like there's a collection of these paper copies of these actual like letters that he wrote. Like that's really powerful to me. It's like, there's this document that says, this person was here and this is what they were. This is where they were, at the moment, when they wrote this letter to this person from this place. It's a really powerful thing to have. I don't know if emails do that.
No, they don't. They don't. And as you said, you're a millennial. I think I'm an elder millennial. I think elderly.
Geriatric millennial.
Yeah. That's the word. Yeah, I think that's a real term. That's like a real term.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the one I was looking for. Yeah, I'm a geriatric millennial. Like I think I may have just squeezed in like that first year of the range. But yes, letter writing. As you said, the physical act of receiving, opening a letter, or even writing one, putting a stamp on it, putting in an envelope, that is missed. You can't get that from email. And I understand it. Email, yes, it makes it'll be here, it'll last, right? Versus the letters could be damaged, they could be burned, they could get wet. I understand.
Okay, like the first thing to go in the apocalypse is going to be Google's servers. So,
right, exactly,
so email might not be.
Right, exactly. It may not be here forever, right? But yes, but the letters, having the hard copy letters, being able to read them, and as you said, being able to hold on to them and have something to protect, right? Yes, they can be damaged, but you have something in your house or your home or wherever that you prioritize. So you put it up or you put it away or you lock it away. Versus the email, you don't even have that level of care because you're thinking, oh, any computer or any phone that I can get on, any iPad I can get on, I'll find it. So.
And I don't need to know where it is. I can search for it.
Yeah, exactly right. I'll just type it in and yeah, okay. But yes.
I mean, I say this, but I'm guilty of this. So.
Oh, yeah, me too. When I talk to my parents, my dad, he doesn't understand any of it. So, but yes, as a geriatric millennial, I'm like caught in the middle. But yeah, Soledad brother is just so profound to read these letters and to get autobiography in that way, right? It's just not just chapters and text. It is this man's thinking and his words shared with the rest of the world. So,
and it's, I mean, God, the strain of, I reading about people's experiences while they're incarcerated, it just seems like, it's so much pressure. It's like you're in the space that like, not only like the physical space, but with the people and, the kind of, I don't know, the very like surveillance state nature of it. It's like, that is such it's pretty incredible that, there's this that he was able to document things in this way and to express himself in this way. It's under terrible conditions, really.
Yes. Yeah, and he would smuggle some of the letters out to Angela Davis and to others, and it was compiled into this book, and the book was put on sale while he was incarcerated, and it sold very well. He was incarcerated for 10 years, so even though it was a one to life term, he stayed in 10 years before he died. And it wasn't the only book that he was in. There was another book called Blood in My Eye, but this is the most popular one. Soledad Brothers. So I recommend it for anyone. Check it out if you can.
Very cool. Dewitt, maybe we should like bring letter writing back.
All right.
And use it to as a way to document our time, our experience. I don't know.
Geriatric millennials. Maybe I'll lead the letter writing campaign, writing checks, like all of it. We just bring all of these things back from the 80s and 90s. Right?
Oh, that's great. Okay. Well, shall I share my last one?
Yes.
Okay. So my last pick is a book called When I Was Puerto Rican by Esmeralda Santiago. And in preparation for this, I was looking up Esmeralda Santiago because I read this book years ago and it's like refresh my memory. But Esmeralda Santiago is actually pretty well known for her memoirs. She's written, I think it's 2 or 3 others. But this one, When I Was Puerto Rican, focuses on her childhood in Puerto Rico it's like the 50s, 60s in there. But so there are 2 things about this book that really stood out to me and made me think of it immediately, like when we decided that we were going to look at memoirs and autobiographies. So the first one is, so I never really, we hear that, Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States. And it's like, you periodically you hear about they vote about applying for statehood, or like, you hear about things like that. But like, I don't think I ever learned about the actual like history of kind of the imperialist history of the United States relationship with Puerto Rico. And
I certainly didn't.
And I've tried to learn a little bit more since then, but it's still something that still an area where I have improvement to do. But this book, it's another one of those like show not tell in terms of introducing the topic. And in this book, it's like, she talks about, it shows up in like the school curriculum, right? They were like, her teachers had to teach like an American school curriculum that, like the way Santiago portrays it, it makes very little sense. It like there's not a lot that applies to like how she lives with her family in Puerto Rico, like the examples and kind of the context of what she's taught in school is like, what is this? But another thing is like, so there was this program where like kids were given like breakfast and lunches at school, right? And it was provided by, I want to say it was the American government, but it was like, I would have to double check that. But there's this scene where she's like, she eats peanut butter for the first time. And so I like peanut butter. I think peanut butter is great. But as this child who's never eaten peanut butter before and then is expected to eat it, like you have to eat it, it's part of this thing at school, you are required basically to eat it.
Okay.
It's this like, it's forced on her as something unfamiliar that she doesn't understand and doesn't particularly want. And it's like, you wouldn't think that like reading about a gross food experience would be so meaningful, but but it's a really wonderful way of, especially from a child's perspective, like explaining that experience from a child's perspective, it is a really wonderful way of demonstrating just how ridiculous, like the kind of the imposition of culture that goes along with, colonial and imperial kind of ties everywhere is. It's all just.
it's like a basic expression of imperialism.
Yeah, it's like, you want me to eat peanut butter? And this kid says, I don't want to, it's gross. Why do I have to do that?
Right. And you force her to eat the peanut butter. That's, yeah.
I don't know. And, I frame this by saying, I do like peanut butter. This book didn't put me off peanut butter. So it's like,
And I love it. I love it. Maybe you and I are just too American. I don't know.
Yeah, we grew up with it. We weren't expected, we grew up with it. It's familiar. Yeah. But, the other part of this book that really stood out to me is her mother, who she calls Mommy, is such a strong character. And ultimately the book ends, her mother takes them to New York. I think without their father, they go. And she's this really strong woman who's really just beautifully described. There are a couple of like these really beautiful, like nature similes, like her mother's like compared to like, the like natural elements, or like, I think there's this one about, comparing like one of the dresses she's wearing to constellations or stars. And it's just these beautiful moments where this woman who works really hard to take care of her kids and, help them survive is also beautiful in moments. And And so that was another thing about this book that stood out to me. So, and I was Puerto Rican, Esmeralda, Santiago.
So I think what's cool about your 3 picks now is When I Was Puerto Rican is one of the more popular, one of the more known books. And then you have 2 books that the average reader, average person certainly, but maybe even the average reader has not come across.
Yeah. I think Maggie Nelson is definitely like, she's kind of a niche, kind of a thing. But I think, and I understand if like, I understand maybe why, but Jesmyn Ward, everyone should be reading Jesmyn Ward. Jesmyn Ward should be everywhere. Like I just put that out there. I know this was like my discussion of this book was like really sad and very like very serious, but Jesmyn Ward is such a talented writer that like she should just be a star shining everywhere. Okay.
No, that's great. That really is. I never read the When I Was Puerto Rican, but I think it's something that I need to check out now because I just don't know enough about Puerto Rican history.
Yeah.
As I should, being someone born in America. So.
Yeah, it's another legacy we need to come to terms with, or like that's how I see it. It's like it's another thing we're responsible for that we need to, or that we need to understand and reckon with.
Yes. So I'll go with my last pick, and I'll try to keep it succinct, which is not something
but it's so exciting. Your last pick is exciting.
Yes, being succinct is not something that I do well. But my last pick, back to my Nero box. Okay. All of the listeners who have listened to Hannah touch on a wide range of topics. I am back to the 1960s and 70s of Black revolutionary, Black liberation, Black civil rights. And I have the Autobiography of Angela Davis, one of my favorite books of all time. A small thing that's a big thing about this book is that it was published in 1974. And to my knowledge, I could be wrong, someone else correct me, she has not written any other autobiographies since then. So we're talking almost 50 years. And she is an icon, right? She's an icon. So it's not like she just disappeared from memory or disappeared from the public since 1974. If anything, she's gotten bigger and bigger. But her autobiography is absolutely amazing. I bought this at a used book sale for $7.50, and this is the word bargain. If bargain was a picture, $7 for this book was a steal. But it talks about her upbringing in Birmingham, Alabama, in the 50s and 60s, and Birmingham being in Alabama with the heavy segregation, and her family was one of the first Black families to move onto the block of where she lived. But of course, that instituted the white flight. For those that don't know, white flight is when you have an all-white area or all-white block, and you start to have Black people move in, the white people move out. Coming with the term white flight. But it talks about her experiences growing up. She actually she grew up in a segregated area, but she wasn't necessarily poor. Her mom was a teacher. Both her mom and dad were teachers, but her dad also owned a gas station. So in relative terms for the Black community, she was financially okay. But she grew up, she was deep into learning. She was very intellectual as a child. Her mother made sure that she was a reader. She had a weekly quota of library books that she had to read every week as a child, which I think is really dope. And you see that now because she's such an intellectual. But she was very passionate about civil rights, Black rights, and those things. And she felt that the people in Birmingham, Black people in Birmingham, were too content with segregation and racial oppression. Obviously, her parents being the older generation, they believed in not rocking the boat because they knew that rocking the boat in racial matters could lead to death or serious injury. But every generation always pushes the envelope. She didn't understand that. She was like, no, everyone's passive. I have to get out of Birmingham if I want to get, sort of harness these desires. So at the age of 16, while she was in high school, she was a part of a exchange program that brought Black students from the South up north into integrated schools. She signed up for that program. She jumped into it, and she went to high school in Brooklyn, is it Brooklyn or the Bronx? In New York. It was in New York City. She went to high school in New York City, and she was just transformed from that point. It was the first time that she was in high school, and she was in a school where the teachers weren't Black, but they talked about things like imperialism. They talked about things like communism, things that she didn't learn in Birmingham. We're talking New York City, it's extremely liberal, right? She's seen her teachers wear jeans. She saw her teachers wear beards, and these are things that just didn't happen. She's growing up. But that put this drive into her to travel and to explore. So in college, she did a lot of international travel. She spent time in France, all during her college years as a college student. She spent just a lot of time abroad. But that time abroad, she missed the larger civil rights moments because she did these things in the early 60s. So she was not around for the March on Washington because she was abroad. She was not around for the bombing of the church of the 4 little girls in Birmingham, Alabama, her hometown. One of the girls whom she knew. She was out of the country at this time. But when she came back after graduating, she got right into the movement, right into the radical movement. She moved to California, started studying for a PhD, and she was just the Angela Davis that we know, right? In the mix, trying to fight for the rights of everyone. And I'll be brief, I promise. One misconception about Angela Davis was that she was some sort of deeply involved, longtime Black Panther, right? And it wasn't the case. Angela Davis was a Black Panther for a very short amount of time, and she wasn't very active. She came in toward the tail end of the Black Panthers, did not necessarily like the direction it was going, and then she left. I think because of her time period and her politics and her look, right? She's known for the big afro and everything. People automatically assume that she would, or associate her as a Black Panther. She's a Black Panther for a short period of time, and then she wasn't. But she had all sorts. What she was at the time, though, she was a deep communist, right? She's very loyal to the Communist Party, and she had a professorship at the University of Cal Berkeley, I believe, in philosophy. And she was denied the job, or she was threatened to be fired because of her identification with the Communist Party. The governor at the time, that guy people may know, his name is Ronald Reagan. The governor at the time was explicit about getting her out of her position because she was a communist. And she sued and she won. But it goes into her, no, I swear. Okay, it's the last thing. I swear. It goes into murder trial. She was on trial for murder, and she went underground and she hid. She eventually got caught, but she beat the murder case and she came out innocent. Her murder case was tied to George Jackson's situation with his brother Jonathan. We talked about it with Soledad brother. Jonathan, his younger 17-year-old brother, tried to break George out of jail by force. And in the midst of that, Jonathan was killed, but also 2 other innocent people were killed. A judge was killed and everything. The guns that Jonathan used to try to break his brother out of jail, they were purchased by Angela Davis. The law at the time was that any crime that's committed with the gun that you've been purchased, you are not liable for murder. So her murder trial was connected to George Jackson and Jonathan Jackson's situation. She went underground, but again, she wasn't there. She was not there that day. She was nowhere nearby. Jonathan Jackson was her bodyguard, so he had the guns that she bought, and that's how that whole situation went down. It's all intertwined. But today we know her as an activist, as a professor, as an author, as someone who's working for the abolition of prisons. someone who is working for equality for LGBTQ individuals. She no longer identifies with the Communist Party, but she has always been anti-capitalist, and she's just a very dope person. So my long-winded succinct.
Yeah, no, I find it like, I mean, she's written a ton, like she's a prolific author, but I'm kind of amazed. I didn't know that was her only work of autobiography.
Yes, to my knowledge, I could be wrong, but
yeah,
it's certainly the only book that's titled an autobiography. Now, some of her other books might be autobiographical, but yes, this is the only one with the title.
Yeah. Well, I'm fascinated to learn. I didn't know that she'd spent so much time traveling, and then that was like one of her foundational experiences. Yeah. I find that very interesting.
Yes, she spent a lot of her college years traveling. She went to Brandeis University in Waltham, Massachusetts, where I think she was one of 4 Black freshmen at orientation. So she felt she was a bit of a loner. And she said, well, after her first year of college, she was like, well, I'm going to spend my time traveling, my summers traveling. It's not like I have many friends in the 1960s in Waltham, Massachusetts. So I'll take this time to, and she built friendships with the international students on campus. And she decided to travel. And it's definitely, as she has said, one of the best things she's ever done in her life. So.
Well, I think we've gone over an hour again, so we've done a good job of talking about these books.
Yeah, something about readers. They talk a lot. Right? It's not contradictory, right?
Oh, well, yeah, but the more you read, the more connections you're going to make between like the things you read, and the more you want to like, I don't know. There's an instinct to talk with other people about what you read. That, yeah, you've got it. I've got it. We're yeah.
We are certified book nerds, and I love it.
Yes. Okay, well, I guess it's about time to wrap up, right? Do you have anything you want to say in conclusion?
I would like to say thank everyone who is listening. If you are listening, share this with someone, please, and continue to join us on our journey as we do nerdy things with books, bookish, nerdy people that we are. Enjoyed it.
And I guess as the librarian, I will add, if you want to take a look at any of these books, stop by the library. We have a bunch of them. And if we don't have it, we can get it for you. So stop by the library if you want any of these books.
Support every library you ever come across ever.
Yes.
Rent a book, do something.
Use the Wi-Fi,
Use the Wi-Fi.
All the range of things. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Side note, we will advocate for libraries on this podcast. Okay.
Always. Libraries are the best. Take advantage.
Okay. Well, on that wonderful note, thank you for listening and take care.
Thank you.